Somewhere outside Saint-Lô, France, in the summer of 1944, a 19-year-old from rural Ohio climbed into the hull of an M4 Sherman tank at first light. His job was to sit beside 77 rounds of 7.5mm ammunition, stacked in open racks along the hull floor and walls, separated from his legs by nothing more than a thin steel bracket and a canvas bag. The engine behind him ran on high-octane gasoline. The armor surrounding him was 2 inches thick at the front, which sounds like protection until you understand that a German 88mm POC-43 anti-tank gun could punch clean through 4 inches of rolled steel at 500 meters. He probably knew the odds. The crews all did. They called the Sherman the Ronson after the cigarette lighter company, whose slogan at the time was "Lights first time, every time." It was not a joke. It was an operational assessment. Between June and August of 1944, Allied armored units in the Normandy hedgerow country lost over 4,000 Sherman tanks. Not all of them burned, but enough of them did that the Army's own internal casualty analysis, a report that would not surface publicly for nearly 30 years, noted that fire-related deaths inside disabled Shermans accounted for a disproportionate share of total tanker fatalities, not the penetration itself, but what happened in the seconds after. The round came through. The ammunition caught. The crew had, on average, between 8 and 15 seconds to exit a 4-man vehicle through 2 hatches before the interior temperature exceeded the threshold for human survival. 8 seconds. Sometimes less. To understand why the Sherman burned the way it did, you have to go back to the design decisions made not on a battlefield, but in the procurement offices of Detroit and Washington between 1,940 and 1,942 decisions driven by production speed, shipping logistics, and a fundamental misreading of what tank warfare in Europe was actually going to look like. The M4 Sherman entered full production in February of 1942. At its peak, American factories were producing over 2,000 units per month across 11 separate manufacturing plants, including facilities run by Chrysler, Ford, Fisher Body, and Lima Locomotive Works. That production volume was, by any industrial measure, an extraordinary achievement. The problem was that the engineers optimized for throughput, not survivability, and the single most lethal consequence of that optimization was the ammunition storage system. In the original M4 configuration, the main gun, rounds each one roughly 26 inches long and weighing between 15 and 19 pounds depending on type, were stored in open sponson racks which sat along the lower hull on both sides of the crew compartment. The racks were positioned low in the vehicle for center of gravity reasons, which made mechanical sense. But it also meant that when a penetrating round or a shaped charge warhead entered the hull, the most probable debris path led directly into those ammunition racks. When propellant caught fire, it did not detonate in the traditional sense, it deflagrated, meaning it burned extremely rapidly, releasing enormous heat and overpressure inside the sealed metal box. The effect on the crew was not incidental, it was total. German tanker accounts from the Normandy campaign are remarkably consistent on this point. Panzer crews noted in their debriefs that a Sherman struck in the hull would frequently show a visible flash from the hatches within 2 to 4 seconds, the ammunition lighting off before the crew had time to react. Some accounts describe the turret being lifted off the hull entirely by the internal pressure. American tankers had a different name for that specific outcome. They called it a jack-in-the-box. Now, the Army knew about the fire problem before D-Day. This is not speculation. An internal engineering review conducted in late 1943, following combat reports from North Africa and Sicily, explicitly identified the sponson ammunition storage as a survivability liability. The report recommended a transition to what was called wet stowage, a system in which the ammunition rounds were placed inside water glycol-filled containers that would suppress ignition on contact with hot fragments. The physics were sound. Testing confirmed the system reduced ammunition fires by approximately 80% in controlled penetration trials. The wet stowage system was approved. Production conversion began. But here is the timeline that no Pentagon briefing ever highlighted voluntarily. The first M4 Sherman variant with factory-installed wet stowage, designated the M4A 176W, did not reach frontline units in meaningful numbers until the spring of 1945, 11 months after the beaches at Normandy, 11 months after the Bocage fighting around St. Lo, after Operation Cobra, after the Falaise Pocket, after the Hurtgen Forest, after the opening phase of the Bulge. For all of those campaigns, American tankers were still climbing into vehicles that the Army's own engineers had formally identified as unnecessarily lethal. The production pipeline had priority. The logistics of retrofitting existing vehicles was deemed too complex, and the men inside the tanks absorbed the consequence of that calculation in real time. The 2nd Armored Division lost 63 Shermans in a single week of hedgerow fighting in July 1944. The 3rd Armored Division, nicknamed Spearhead, suffered a total of approximately 648 tanks destroyed or damaged during the entire European campaign, with the division's own after-action reports noting that a significant portion of those losses were total write-offs because of internal fire, meaning the vehicle was not just disabled but destroyed from the inside out, with the crew's survival probability approaching zero once the fire started. Staff Sergeant Horace Wester, 3rd Armored, described the process in a 1968 oral history recorded by the Army's Center of Military History, a document that sat in a restricted archive for years before being partially declassified. His words were straightforward. You learned not to think about it. If you thought about it, you would not get in. So you did not think about it, and you got in, and you drove. If you were a combat engineer or an ordnance officer who reviewed the original 1943 survivability report and then watched the 1944 procurement schedule proceed unchanged, what do you do with that? That question has no clean answer, and the men who could have answered it directly have mostly been dead for decades. But the documentation exists. The paper trail exists, and it tells a story that is considerably less triumphant than the version that ended up in the official histories. The comparison to German armor is almost too uncomfortable to include in an official context, which is probably why it rarely appeared in American military publications until the 1970s. The Panzer IV, the primary German medium tank, used a manual fire suppression system and had its ammunition stowed in a combination of floor bins and bustle racks that, while not a perfect solution, offered better protection against the specific failure mode ammunition ignition that was killing American crews. The Tiger I and Panther both featured ammunition arrangements that placed the bulk of rounds in the turret bustle or in protected floor storage, away from the primary hull penetration zone. The Panther, specifically, was a more dangerous opponent than a Sherman in almost every measurable category at medium and long range. A Panther's 7.5mm Quicka K-42 gun could kill a Sherman from over 1,000 meters. A Sherman 7.5mm M3 gun could kill a Panther frontally only at ranges under 100 meters, essentially point-blank in field terms, and only if the shot hit the specific lower glacis below the gun mantlet. American tankers in Normandy knew this. The tactical doctrine that emerged attack in groups of 5, except that 2 or 3 would be destroyed, hope the survivors close distance fast enough to flank was not strategy. It was arithmetic. The ratio varied depending on terrain and conditions, but the broad consensus from multiple post-war analyses places the Sherman to Panther exchange rate at somewhere between 4-to-1 and 5-to-1 in direct engagements. For every Panther destroyed, the Allies expected to lose 4 or 5 Shermans. The Army accepted this ratio explicitly, on the grounds that American industrial production could replace the vehicles faster than Germany could replace theirs. The logic was correct at the macro level. It was considerably less persuasive at the level of the specific crew inside the specific vehicle that became one of the 4. By the winter of 1944, the Army had begun receiving preliminary casualty analysis from theater commanders in Europe. The data was organized by cause of death within destroyed vehicles, and a subset of the reports specifically flagged ammunition ignition fires as a leading cause of non-survivable crew casualties in Sherman losses, meaning cases where the vehicle was hit but the penetration wound alone would not necessarily have been fatal, but the secondary fire was. These reports were compiled into a formal summary analysis in early 1945. That summary was classified. It was not declassified until 1975. Under a Freedom of Information Act, request filed by a veterans advocacy group that had been attempting for years to understand why so many armored infantry families had received casualty notifications listing cause of death simply as killed in action. Tank engagement with no further specifics. The families had been told their sons and husbands died fighting. The document confirmed that a substantial number of them had died burning inside vehicles their own government's engineers had flagged as inadequately designed, in a window of time when the fix existed on paper but not yet on the production line. The 1,975 declassification received almost no mainstream press coverage. One article in the Army Times noted the document's existence. No congressional inquiry followed. No formal acknowledgement was issued to the families of the men affected. The Sherman itself was not inherently a bad vehicle. Understand that clearly. Its mechanical reliability was genuinely exceptional. It broke down far less frequently than German armor. It was easier to recover from the field, and its wide tracks gave it acceptable performance across varied terrain. In the Pacific Theater, operating against Japanese armor that was substantially lighter and less well-armed, the Sherman was dominant. In Italy, in the specific geography of the Apennine mountain passes, its mobility gave it advantages that heavier German vehicles lacked. But in the hedgerows of Normandy, on the flat killing ground of the Rhine approaches, in the dense forests of the Hurtgen, where flanking maneuvers were nearly impossible and engagements happened at close range with no margin for tactical finesse in those specific environments, the Sherman's design flaws cost American lives in a volume that was foreseeable, partially foreseen, and not corrected in time. The wet stowage Shermans that arrived in 1945 were measurably better. Post-war testing confirmed the 80% reduction in ammunition fires held up in field conditions. Veterans who served in both variants noted the difference immediately, not in the way the tank drove or fought, but in the way it felt to sit beside the ammunition. The rounds were sealed, the racks were covered. The specific dread of knowing that a bad hit would turn your vehicle into a furnace in under 10 seconds was, if not eliminated, substantially reduced. That improvement came approximately 14 months after the engineers recommended it. 14 months is a long time when you are sitting in a hull with 77 unsuppressed rounds and a high-octane engine 6 inches behind your left shoulder. The last documented case of a Sherman crew loss attributed specifically to ammunition ignition fire in European theater records occurred on the 18th of April, 1945, less than 4 weeks before VE Day. The vehicle was assigned to the 14th Armored Division, operating near Hammelburg, Germany. 3 of the 4 crew members were killed. The tank had not received the wet stowage modification. According to the unit's maintenance records, the modification kit had been requisitioned in February and had not yet arrived. The war ended 20 days later. The names of those 3 men are on a memorial in Hammelburg. The cause of their deaths, the specific chain of decisions and deferrals that put them in that tank on that day without the modification that existed in Army inventory, none of that is written anywhere near those names. There are currently over 11 million pages of World War II Army operational records held at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. A portion of them remain restricted under various exemption categories. Some of those restrictions were placed not for intelligence reasons, not for ongoing operational security, but for reasons that the declassification review boards have historically categorized as reputational sensitivity. That category has no expiration date written into it.